Hey everybody, it is Brian, the home loan and real estate guy. This is like my third video today. As you can imagine, I've been getting a lot of calls. People want to know, hey, I heard about the Fed rate cut. Does that mean my mortgage rate is going down by 0.5%? The answer is no. So I wanted to do a video and explain to people what the difference is between the Fed fund rate and mortgage rates, because they are not connected in any way. They do move in sync with one another, but they are physically not connected to one another. So let me do this video, and I want to explain the difference between the Fed fund rate and mortgage rates. So here goes. First and foremost, what everybody has to understand is the Fed fund rate is the rate that banks lend money back and forth to one another, okay? Then banks take that money and they lend it to the consumer for credit cards, auto loans, and equity lines of credit, but not mortgages, okay? Mortgages are part of the bond markets, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. So mortgages are not tied to the Fed fund rate. They're tied to the bond market. So that's over there, okay? So the Fed fund rate, again, is the rate that's used to lend money back and forth between the banks, okay? And what happens is when the economy is doing really well, okay, and there's a lot of consumer spending, you have super low unemployment, you have a lot of consumer spending, the economy's just going like crazy, right? Well, what happens is when the economy's just going like gangbusters, over time, inflation starts to ink up, okay? And then inflation will get to a point where it's out of control, it's not sustainable, so the Fed has to basically step in, and what they will do is they will raise the Fed fund rate, okay, to kind of put a lid on that rising inflation and bring inflation down, okay? So the Fed fund rate is actually a tool that the Fed uses to control inflation. So when inflation is rising, the Fed will raise the Fed fund rate to kind of stop consumer spending or slow it down and bring that down, okay? As a result, when they do this, that affects employment, okay? So when you have super low unemployment and a lot of consumer spending, you get inflation, the Fed steps in, they raise the Fed fund rate to put a lid on it, and then over time, they keep raising the Fed fund rate and it keeps just bringing that inflation down, okay? But what happens as a result of slowing down consumer spending, the result of that is you will start to see unemployment tick up, okay? And that's kind of how all of this works with the Fed fund rate, you know, raising and lowering it. Well, what happens is they raise that Fed fund rate to a point where unemployment will get a little too high, somewhere in like the 4 or 5% range, kind of where it's at now. And that's not good for the economy either. So then the Fed has to step back in, and then they bring the Fed fund rate down. And the reason they do that is to spur growth. They want people to spend, right? And the more people are spending, the more jobs are created, and then the economy is robust again. So the Fed actually has a really hard job. They have to balance inflation, balance the unemployment rate, and that is difficult. And they use the Fed fund rate to do that balancing, okay? So again, in a really good market where, you know, unemployment is low and consumer spending is high, inflation gets out of control, Fed steps in, lowers that down, but in the process of lowering that, unemployment rises, so the Fed has to step back in after a period of time and bring rates back down to kind of put a lid on that and spur growth. So it's this vicious cycle that takes place over and over again, and it's been that way since basically the dawn of time and spending and all that stuff. So anyways, that's the Fed fund rate, okay? That's over there, and that's what's going on right now. So the Fed just lowered the Fed fund rate for credit cards, auto loans, and equity lines of credit, but they did not lower the rate for mortgages because they're not tied, okay? So now let's talk about mortgage rates over here. So what a lot of people don't know and what they need to understand is that there's two main avenues that investors invest in, okay? They invest in the stock market and they invest in the bond market, okay? So you have this group of investors right here that will either invest in stocks or they'll invest in bonds, okay? And mortgages, mortgage-backed securities, are part of this bond market over here, okay? So what will happen is, again, they're not tied to the rate, but they move in sync. So when the Fed lowers the Fed fund rate, they're lowering it because unemployment is on the rise, right? And people aren't spending. So as they're bringing that rate back down, okay, they're trying to then spur the economy. Well, what happens with mortgage-backed securities is when the Fed is lowering that Fed fund rate, okay, investors in the stock market, they know that the economy is not good. The only reason that the Fed lowers the Fed fund rate is when the economy is in trouble. And that's just the truth. The Fed just doesn't lower the Fed fund rate because the economy is doing great. Again, they use this as a tool up and down. So investors, okay, who are looking to invest either in the stock market or the bond market, when they hear that the Fed is going to be lowering the interest rate, when they see unemployment rising, that affects their investments. So what do? They pull money out of the stock market and they put it into the bond market. That flow of money coming out of stocks into mortgages or the bond market pushes rates down. So some will argue, and it is true, right? The Fed fund rate and mortgage rates move in sync, but when the Fed does a rate cut, it doesn't directly impact mortgage rates immediately. The only thing that it does, it's helping people with credit cards, auto loans, and equity lines of credit. Those people will see an immediate cut in rates. But mortgage rates for first mortgages like FHA, VA, conventional, those do not just come down by 0.5%. We will see mortgage rates, and mortgage rates have been trending lower based on the news that the Fed is cutting rates. But the actual rate cut itself by the Fed has nothing to do with mortgage rates. All we're seeing is investors are a little spooked by what's going on in the economy, and they're pulling their money from stocks and they're putting it into bonds because bonds are a safe haven for investors. This is where investors go to put their money, okay? So when the stocks are doing great, they pull it. They're like, hey, I don't want, my money in this low bond. I want to put it where I'm making 10 and 15% in the stock market, okay? So that's where we'll see mortgage rates go up and go down in connection, or like the timing of like when the Fed is doing these rate cuts, okay? When they raise rates, when they lower them. It takes time. So here's just a prime example. It was a couple weeks ago, a report came out. It was called the BLS report, Bureau of Labor and Statistics. This report basically gives the health of the economy, right? Or I'm sorry, the health of the labor market, not the economy. It tells us how many people are working part-time or full-time jobs, what wage increases there are, where the unemployment rate is at. Well, this report came out a couple weeks ago, and it was a pretty weak report. The last couple reports were pretty weak. It showed a decline in job openings, right? And it showed a rise in unemployment. So the stock market saw that report and they go, uh-oh, unemployment is going up. What is the Fed going to do? The Fed doesn't want unemployment to go up too high, okay? Because if it gets too high, then things get really bad, like recession and all that stuff. So investors were like, uh-oh, the Fed is going to probably cut rates at their next meeting. So what happened? Just based off of this report that happened a couple weeks ago, traders started pulling money out of stocks and putting it into bonds, right? Because they saw the writing on the wall. They were like, hey, the economy is not going as great as what everybody has been saying. The unemployment rate's ticking up. Yeah, inflation is down, but the unemployment rate is going up, right? Again, this is going back to the beginning of the video, what the Fed does, how they manipulate the market with raising and lowering the Fed fund rate to control inflation and the unemployment rate. So investors saw this a couple weeks ago and they were like, uh-oh, the Fed's going to cut rates. Let's pull. Boom. There's an influx of money going into the bond market. And that's what actually pushed rates lower. A lot of people don't know this, but mortgage rates have moved lower, anywhere from 1/4 to 0.5% lower over the last 30 days prior to the rate cut. Matter of fact, today we haven't seen any movement on rate. The Fed rate cut, 0.5%, mortgage rates didn't move at all, didn't go up, didn't go down. So it all has to do with the movement of money. That's how mortgage rates are affected by all of this. Okay, so ultimately, again, not directly connected, they're kind of indirectly connected, and they move in sync with one another. So as the Fed brings down the Fed fund rate over time, mortgage rates will come down as a result as well, because again, the Fed only cuts the Fed fund rate when the economy is in trouble. And when the economy is in trouble, investors pull money from stocks and put it into bonds, and the more money that goes into bonds pushes rates down. So this is how it works. This is the movement of money, okay? This is not new. This is something that we've known for a while. As a matter of fact, if you go watch all my videos, I've been telling everybody it's super important that you get your applications in. If you're looking to buy, if you're looking to refi, get them in. Let's get the loans done. Let's get them approved. Because, again, even though they're not connected, they do move in sync. And over a period of time, as this cut works its way into the system, okay, and as more rates cuts come, investors are going to get nervous as unemployment rate rises and more money is going to come out of stocks and go right into bonds, and that's going to push rates lower. So if you want to know what's going to happen with mortgage rates are going to continually trend lower over the days, weeks, and months ahead. It's not going to be a straight line down. It's going to go up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, right? There's going to be things that are going to affect the market. But over time, mortgage rates are moving lower. We're done with the high rate cycle. We're now in the lower rate cycle. I can't believe I just spilt my soda all over my desk. But anyways, don't want to scroll there. So if you have questions about this, if you would like to know more about the movement of money and how the Fed fund rate affects mortgage rates and all of that stuff, give me a call, reach out. This is what I do, home loans and real estate. This is my business. We study this all day long. We have a pulse on the market. So again, you ever have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Take care, everybody. Have a great day. Bye.